I've been studying this event for a good 25 years now. In fact, it all began when my neighbor approached me about preserving open space, which we're currently attempting to do now. In fact, this is the last piece of the green belt, which we hope to put in place around a historic Allentown, protect the historic district. And we worked together to find out if there was any truth to the legend that Molly Pitcher of Monmouth battle fame was from Allentown. Well, we started to do research. I worked for the state at the time, fortunately, and I had time at my lunch hour, and I would go to the state archives and to the library there, state library, and look up certain things that I was asked to find. And this went on for approximately 2 years. We put together a 100-page document with mainly primary source material. And from that, we became somewhat of experts on the Revolutionary War in this area. In fact, we in Allentown hosted the first Crossroads of the American Revolution meeting, public meeting. And Charlie Dietrich, I see you're online tonight. Hats off to you, Charlie. Charlie was responsible for the Patriot Route back in the 225th anniversary initiative that we belonged, that we were partners on. And Richard Walling was the leader of the group, president of the Friends of the Monmouth Battlefield at that time. And I was responsible for the British route. So as I said, it's been 25 years and I've been studying it ever since, and I keep learning new things, and it's really a fascinating story. And I welcome this opportunity to present this to everyone tonight. Here you'll see a map that was included with our first outreach to the reenactment groups of all things. And we had proposed that we were going to have, this was to the British reenactment groups, we were going to have events leading up to the 225th anniversary weekend, which is coming up this weekend at the battlefield in Freehold. And we would have events in each of these different spots along the way that the British had encamped. At the same time, we would have events on the Patriot Rail on the same day. Quite an event. It was covered well by the Star Ledger in full colors handouts, where they just really brought it and provided quite a bit of historical information and images. And it was 25 years ago. That was a big deal for a newspaper to have such an historical treasure that we still have today. So from that event, we moved on. And I'm going to give you a cast of characters now of the individuals when the British marched across New Jersey. The background story essentially is that the French had entered the war after the Gates, and with the help of Benedict Arnold, defeated John Burgoyne up at Saratoga in October of '77. So that gave the French the confidence. They had been surreptitiously providing support to the colonies, to the Patriots. But now they could openly show their support, and they decided to come in on the side of the Patriots and Washington Army. What that meant was that, foolishly, William Howe had taken possession of Philadelphia around that same time, capital of the new country. And he knew that it would be, the British knew it would be untenable to hold that position with the French fleet coming over and being off the coast of New Jersey, blocking the entrance to the Delaware. So therefore, they decided to evacuate. They didn't have enough ships. They sent some men and other loyalists on these ships, and the remaining men, approximately 18,000, marched across New Jersey to consolidate their forces in New York. So that's where we're at. We've got the leader of this group, the new leader, after Hal was let go, Sir Henry Clinton. We have with him, famously, General Lord Cornwallis. Also, we have Hessian General Wilhelm von Nymphenhausen, General Alexander Leslie. I love saying that word, Leslie. And lastly, well, not quite lastly, but we have Colonel John Simcoe, who was the head of the Queen's Rangers, who were usually in the thick of the fighting, especially during this campaign. And he led a group of loyalists. And here we have one of my sources, primary sources, Major Jean Andre. Later in the war, he would infamously be hung as a spy, but at this time, he hadn't even obtained the rank of major yet, the captain. And he's with the troops. He was an artist, a man of much talents, well loved by most people. And he left behind a journal and he left incredible detailed maps that show most of the encampments along the British, some call retreat, evacuation I prefer. And these maps I will show you tonight in succession, and I'll also have another source I'll rely on. Regrettably, I don't have an image of that source, but it's a British order book that was found on the battlefield, legend has it, and that now is in the state archives, that was used by a Judge William Slaughter at his speech he had given in the Fortnightly Club at Mount Holly, which was transcribed and published in the Mount Holly Herald, dated July 19th, 1924. And in there, he showed quite a bit of the primary source information from that orderly book. So I'm going to try to juxtapose the two, reference to the article, and at the same time, provide my knowledge of the local events that happened closer to Allentown in the Trenton, Bordentown area. The road to Monmouth event led to this map, which was quite an effort of another 2 years of my life, attending weekend workshops with the local historical groups and Mr. Dietrich and Mr. Walling and the Friends of the Monmouth Battlefield. And we would go out on field trips. And we would usually go in the winter, springtime, when there wasn't any foliage. And so we could see the terrain. And based upon the primary sources and other information, this is the map that was put together. And it's quite a fascinating map. It shows the British evacuating Philadelphia, most of them from Gloucester Point down this area in the south. They consolidated their troops in Haddonfield, but then they divided, and they needed strategically to divide so that they could protect the 12-mile-long baggage train, which contained all the loot that they had taken from Philadelphia, including furniture, paintings, silver, whatever you could imagine. And along with the Loyalists and their belongings, it was said the 12-mile baggage train was so long that the rear hadn't begun to march by the time the van had rested for the night. It was quite a scene, but they pulled it off logistically, which was quite a feat. And if you look at the map, the way it's currently drawn, which has the 1st Division in red of the British, it also shows the Hessians, who were responsible for the baggage, retreating from the rest of the troops, lagging behind intentionally to make sure the way was clear, and then they would come forward, but not on the same route that the 1st Division took, but on a secondary route. And as they traversed across southern Jersey here, it almost looks like it's a double helix, like a DNA molecule. The way that they were careful to put the fighting men flanking the opposition. Because at that time you had the entire brigade of William Maxwell's Continental War regiments. You had Philemon Dickinson and his militia, which came out this time, unlike 76, when they ran the King's clemency. Now the militia showed up, and they were fighting mad. You notice up here also, there's 3 skirmish 6 signs. That's when things really started to get heated up. And the center one here is crosswicks. It's at the essentially the northwest end before the army turned. Washington is leaving Valley Forge with his newly trained troops, thanks to Baron von Steuben. And he crosses the Delaware again up at Lambertville, New Hope area. But he does not know which way Clinton is going to go. He could continue on this route and go up through Trenton and connect with the Upper York Road through Princeton. He could stay on this route and go to Cranberry and link up and go to the Amboys. Or he could take the most southern route and head east by way of the old Shrewsbury Road, which take him through the heart of Monmouth County and to Sandy Hook. The British always occupied Sandy Hook throughout the war, same way with Staten Island and Manhattan. Here's another map, another source of my material. It's a Hessian map that the West Jersey History Initiative group went over to Germany, and they got these Hessian maps. You notice the same route here. It begins in Mount Holly, not necessarily further south, but what it's showing here, the relief map is showing that this is the high ground. This is the best area, not only to march, but also to defend. Here's our first order book. The men to bring with them their camp kettles. This is May 29, 1778. Canteens, tomahawks, and every necessary article they can carry. The soldiers on May 30th were told not to straggle into the wood nor go beyond the sentries, as the regiment may be subject to sudden alarms, particularly at night. Major Andre titles his journal Operations of the British Army under Lieutenant General Sir Henry Clinton in the year 1778. And his narrative is such. In consequence of the determination taken to evacuate Philadelphia, the 5th Brigade, 26th, 63rd of the 46th and 5th Regiments were passed over the Delaware at Cooper's Ferry, and the wagons with provisions and stores for the march parked there under cover. On the 18th, before daybreak, General Grant with the 1st and 2nd Brigades and the Hessian Grenadiers marched in different columns to Gloucester Point, where he crossed the Delaware at flatboats. Flatboats necessary to move the wagons, the horses, and the artillery. Most of the troops crossed here. At sunrise, the 3rd and 4th Brigades and the Guards were put in motion and came to Gloucester Point, where they crossed. The Grenadiers and the light infantry passed last. The Vigilant, the British warship, was stationed a little above the point, and here guns could graze the neck of the land through which the troops passed to render the embarkation secure. 46th and 55th marched same mornings from Cooper Ferry, Gloucester Point, where they joined the respective brigades. As soon as the troops were passed, General Nymphausen with Hessian Grenadiers and the 1st and 2nd Brigades marched to Haddonfield. Lord Cornwallis with the light infantry, British Guards, and 3rd and 4th Brigades followed soon after and halted for the night within 2 miles of the Haddonfield. Here's an Andre map of the state of New Jersey. This is an inset of that map. It's showing the troops marching here from Philadelphia down to Gloucester Point, and then the latter troops marching from Cooper's Ferry across into Camden. I believe this is Leslie's detachment. Leslie would continue in the van throughout this operation. He had the light troops, the light infantry, etc. And they quickly moved from Camden to Morristown, and occupied Morristown. The Hessians and Clinton are in Haddonfield. And it's not until they depart, well, 2 miles from Haddonfield, it's not until they depart from that location and start to move east that Nymphausen and the baggage and the wagon train move forward to Morristown for protection, while the 1st Division is out here going through Evesham, Fostertown, and Ayerstown, where quite a few skirmishes had occurred. The occupation in Morristown, this was known as the Hessian House. This is from Al Fraz's Revolutionary New Jersey site, which is a great resource for not only images like this, but also for some primary source information with links. It's a well-researched site. Here's another inset of essentially that same route from the Hessian map. Detail is quite exceptional as far as the road network that existed at that time. Here's an image of the Smith Canterbury estate, which was occupied at the time by the British and made their headquarters. General Leslie and his detachment. This is a headquarters from Evesham. Now, this is the 1st Division moving further along from the British order book. The troops to be in readiness. Up here, you see not only the location and the date, but the parole. The parole and the countersign were given in the general orders each day. And if you were out on a patrol and you were trying to get back into the encampment and you were challenged with the parole jersey, you sure as hell better respond Brunswick or you'll be shot at. It says here the troops to be in readiness to march tomorrow, which will be the 20th at 3 o'clock following order. The Hessian Chasseurs, Queen's Rangers, 63rd Regiment with 2 6-pounders, Ogden's troops, and treachery tools and baggage, 26th Regiment, 7th Regiment, 2-pounders. This is Andre's account the same day. General Leslie with the Corps from Cooper's Ferry brought up the wagons of the army to Haddonfield, where they left. The general proceeding with his corps to Fostertown. Oh, excuse me. Leslie did not go to Morristown and clear the way. which he will do in the future. Lord Cornwallis's column moved before daybreak and passing Haddonfield soon after General Leslie came to Evesham. The grenadiers, on coming to the ground, found a Captain Beasley of militia expiring. He was shot by the Queen's Rangers. Now, Beasley was a captain in the Cumberland militia. And he was mortally wounded during a skirmish near Evesham and taken to Clinton's headquarters for examination, where he gave little information. So impressed with the British of his brave conduct that they buried him with full military honors. Excuse me. The 20th. The rebels, this is again from Evesham, proceeding through Fostertown and Mount Holly. A little way beyond Fostertown, General Leslie's corps joined the rear of the column. The rebels, supposed about 900 in number under General Maxwell, had quitted Mount Holly the morning before. General Nipphausen, having in the evening of the 19th moved the train across a deep ravine 1.5 miles on his road from Haddonfield, marched early to Morristown. So he doesn't move till a full days later, Nipphausen, to occupy Morristown. Here's the encampment in Evesham from Andre's journal. It's very detailed. And it shows headquarters here. There it is, right there, headquarters. Here's an image of the headquarters, again from Revolutionary New Jersey site in Evesham. And it's here that Beasley was interrogated, Captain Beasley. Here's the Evesham meeting where the main body were encamped, meeting house. Both Continentals and British troops have used it intermittently throughout the war. General orders from Mount Holly, parole Prague, countersigned Colin. They're going to bolster the men with 1 gill of extra rum. And a general court-martial consisting of 3 field officers and 10 captains, 2 from the British, interestingly, which means the remainder would be from Hessians, I would assume, near Mount Holly at headquarters tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock for the trial of such prisoners that should be brought before them. So the British are moving along at a fairly good pace at this time, up to this point. Here's the Mount Holly encampment. The British are coming from down here. And if I may refer to Mark Lender's and Gary Wheeler Stone's Fatal Sunday, which is the most comprehensive, well-researched compendium about this campaign. And this is on the 20th, just before occupying Mount Holly. Excuse me for reading this, but the next day, the Redcoats captured another hard man. This is after Beasley. Andrew Bell, a Tory diarist of the campaign and confidential secretary to Sir Henry Clinton, actually seemed offended at the rebel silence. He was so obstinate, Bell wrote, as not to tell the route his comrades had taken. In Mark Lender's and Gary Stone's opinion, what Bell saw was more than obstinacy. If he had looked closely enough, he would have seen a man indicative of many of General Philemon Dickinson's had brought into the field, men a world apart from the militia who had rushed to accept the king's pardon in the dark days of 1776. Clinton knew that Brigadier General William Maxwell, and parenthetically, by the 25th of June, Colonel Daniel Morgan, had disciplined regulars operating against him, and some his lieutenants believed intelligence estimates putting Dickinson's strength alone at over 2,000 men. Actually, it was more like 1,200. But they were doing an excellent job in convincing the British that their strength was much greater. Quite a large encampment here in Mount Holly. I personally have a theory that this was a well-designed evacuation with a couple of objectives, not only to leave Philadelphia and occupy New York, but also to damage as much as the military industry that had built up in this country, this young country at that time. And there was a mill and forge here in Mount Holly that was totally destroyed. In fact, the owner would eventually run the Batstow site down in South Jersey in the Pines, where they were also smelting the bog iron to great effect. And after this site was destroyed here during this British evacuation, it's said here just south of Mount Holly at Hainesport, from the Mount Holly Herald, at Hainesport occurred an exploit worthy of being ranked with the defense of Thermopylae by the Spartans. The bridge over the Rancocas Creek at that point had been destroyed, and a small band of American riflemen took their station in the house on the east bank of the creek and disputed the crossing to the last extremity. When the British finally crossed the creek, they refused to surrender and kept up their defense to the last, being burnt with the house by the British, according to the diary kept by General Clinton's secretary at the time, which is the only account we have of it. These heroes of Hainesport deserve to have their brave deed better known. Here's the British order book from Mount Holly. And it's advising the men, these certain detachments, to be under arms the following morning. Mounted Hessian Jaegers and all dismounted, the Queen's Rangers, an officer, and the Pioneers. 1st Battalion Light Infantry, Queen's Light Dragoons, British Grenadiers, Hessian Grenadiers, 2 Indians, surprisingly. 12-pounder and 1 howitzer, Brigade of Guards, 3 Brigade British, 3 battalions of the 4th Brigade British, and more pontoons. They actually had a movable bridge made of copper plates, hinged copper plates, that they brought with them, where they could cross a creek. It's just amazing. Also, the 5th Brigade British, I guess this Hancock's troop of provincial cavalry, are to be under the command of British General Leslie. Here's the Mount Holly Meeting House. Back to the order book. John Fisher, drummer of the 28th Regiment, tried by the General Court Martial, of which Lieutenant Colonel Grant of the 42nd Regiment was present for desertion and bearing arms in the rebel service, found guilty and sentenced to suffer death. Miranda confirms the above sentence and orders it to be put in execution on the march tomorrow between the hours of 10 and 12. Well, Mr. Fisher had deserted the British Army somewhere in South Jersey, moved to Morristown in North Jersey, joined the militia there, but foolishly came down here to fight. And his excuse when captured was that I just wanted to get closer to you guys so I could desert again. They weren't buying it. They hung him high on the road between Slabtown, today Jacksonville, and Columbus. Here's another account. A Preman Coffee, a Negro, tried by the above court martial for plundering, is found guilty and sentenced to receive 500 lashes. 500 lashes. As my colleague Joe Roblowski asked, do you think he survived? 2 other gentlemen, not Negro slaves, followers of the army, tried by the above court martial for plundering, were acquitted. Here's Andre's journal on the 21st. Claim to Mount Holly, came to Mount Holly with the remainder of the army now assembled in one body. Colonel Allen's corps was posted at the pass in the rear at Rancocas Creek. The 22nd, the army was under arms at 4 o'clock in the morning and marched soon through Slabtown to the Black Horse, today Columbus. General Leslie with the 5th Brigade took an intermediate road between that of the column to Burlington, where it was supposed there might be some rebel troops. By that means flanking the baggage. The 5th Brigade afterwards fell in with the Black Horse Road and brought up the rear. They learned at Black Horse that Maxwell with a large body of men had quitted the place at 2 in the morning. Several papers were found warning that beware of being burgoyned, which was the propaganda at that time, which was a way to mock the troops as they marched by, painted on the sides of barns. And reference again to the execution of Private Fisher. Here's another view of the Mount Holly encampment. That smart skirmishing, Hainesport, happened down here along the Belly Bridge or Bella Bridge Creek, south of Mount Holly. Back to Clinton's map of the general campaign. Here we are now at Black Horse or Columbus. This is where it gets really interesting. According to this map, General Nifhausen with the baggage moves entirely to the southeast of the rest of the troops, because Washington now has sent detachments from where he's camped at Hopewell for 2 days. He had a council of war there. But even before the council of war, the first detachment he sends are 600 picked men under Colonel Daniel Morgan, leader of a Virginia Rifle Corps, about 400 from both the Virginia Rifle Corps and the Pennsylvania Rifle Corps, and an additional 200 men noted for their marksmanship, riflemen. And they were sent out early from Hopewell. And as mentioned, at the same time, Leslie is moving up from the Black Horse. He goes to Burlington, which is to the left or the west, reconnoiters there, and then takes a detachment up here to the Rising Sun with the 1st Division. Now, there's 2 Rising Sun taverns in this talk. This is the one closest to Bordentown. This is essentially where Route 206 today meets Route 130. And it was an area known as Mansfield Square, not to be confused with Mansfield Township, which is where Columbus is. But it was Mansfield Square. And it was quite an affluent area at that time. And if you do study, you find craftsmen and various people using that. The reason why is because the Rising Sun is on an old road across, one of the earliest roads, if not the earliest road across New Jersey, known as the Lower York Road, which was most likely an Indian path that was later used by the colonists to move from New York to Philadelphia. Actually, it's Route 660 in Burlington today. And it comes up just to the west of Recklesstown here, which is known as Chesterfield today. And from there, it connects and goes to Crosswicks and Cranberry and crosses the Raritan and eventually through Woodbridge and Elizabeth, where they would disembark and take ships to New York, or vice versa down to Philadelphia. Because in 1683, the lower part of this section was laid out, according to Deputy Governor Gowan Lowry, why it's sometimes known as the Lowry Road. and it connects the capital of East Jersey, which was Perth Amboy, with the capital of West Jersey in Burlington. So that's why Crosswicks and Allentown and Cranberry are very old towns, because they are sited along that old road. Back to the British order book. Royal Fusiliers weren't behaving. They were rebuked for great irregularities and excesses committed within the last few days. And they're up at Mansfield, Columbus. They divided into two columns. First Division formed the left column. Kniphausen's division formed the right column, led by the 2nd Light Infantry. So Kniphausen is heading out this way to the east. This is the road to Crosswicks, which most of the troops would take, and Leslie would eventually veer off from here. Here's another view of the Black Horse encampment from the Hessian maps, showing actual brigades or regiments, pickets, individual pickets at each location. Incredible detail with the individual roads at that time. Now, these Hessian maps are a compilation of all the activity that the Hessians participated in. So it includes some Trenton-Princeton, especially as they're down here in the Burlington area. Trenton-Princeton campaign encampments also. British Order Book. Now they're in Crosswick. The Army will march tomorrow morning. The Corps of Brigadier General Leslie will, if possible, join the division by 6 o'clock. Well, where's Leslie at this time? I'll tell you where he is. I'll go back here. Leslie takes a detachment of light infantry and marches up towards a possible crossing for the army. It's a feint that is sent out smartly by General Clinton to keep Washington as far west as he can. Washington at this time has no idea which route he's taking. The consensus is they're going to go up through Cranberry and go up to the Raritan that way. Or they'll go to Cranberry and they'll cross over, avoid the Raritan altogether, and cross from Cranberry to South River Cranberry Road and go over to the Amboys and disembark that way. So Washington, until he gets the intelligence that he needs to stay essentially on a longitudinal parallel with this British Army. So Leslie goes out and he tests the defenses here up at Whitehorse, essentially, just outside of Bordentown. Before daylight on the 23rd, this is from the Mount Holly Herald article. A large party of light troops through Bordentown and out the Whitehorse or Trenton Road to the drawbridge. Now there was a drawbridge there that was dismantled. At this time, all the Continental troops were north of the Crosswicks Creek. There were a few on the line of it. The 1st Burlington Regiment under Colonel William Strebe and the 1st Huntington Regiment under Colonel Joseph Phillips were stationed to guard Watson's Ford. Watson's Ford is about halfway between this location here at the drawbridge and Whitehorse and Crosswicks, about right here, today Yardville. At that location, there still exist those readouts that were built. It's what was known as Watkins Crossing. It's where the railroad crosses today. And there's still evidence of those readouts that can be seen. Not easily accessible. You have to go behind the VFW and cross the railroad tracks, but there's still evidence there. So remaining at Whitehorse is the regiments of Frederick Frelinghuysen, Henry Van Dyke, and John Webster. General Dickinson had some readouts thrown up north of the bridge, and the flooring had been removed and the draw raised. Those readouts were probably where the Pearson Memorial Church is today. It's a great location where it would be perfect for artillery. Under the cover of darkness, this is early in the morning, the light troops approached and, having ripped the planks and weatherboards from a neighboring barn, proceeded with zeal to repair the bridge. The militia got under arms and double-quicked to the bridge, but the picket who had been stationed there opened upon the enemy with such spirit as to drive them back with the loss of 4 killed and several wounded. The militia remained under arms the balance of the night and most of the day, but no further attempt was then made to seize the bridge. So that's that first skirmish symbol that was shown on the Road to Monmouth map. Leslie would then proceed back to Crosswicks. Second Division, this is the main army on the 23rd. Second Division, under the command of His Excellency Lieutenant General Nifhausen, will begin to march at 4 o'clock in the morning. Nifhausen at this time occupies Wallingford, an historic site today in Monmouth County. It was the mill of a loyalist at the time. He's a waffling loyalist. He's sent to New York and then comes back to visit, and later he starts to trade with the Patriots. But the early part of the war, he's dead set loyalist. In fact, the pine robbers that you hear so much spoken about, that whole phenomenon actually begun here at Wallingford. That's where they originally started to meet. A group of oil pine robbers. The First Division will be in readiness to march at 6 in the same order. So the Commander-in-Chief gives notice that any person that may hereafter be found committing such disorders will be delivered to the Provost Marshal for immediate execution. So they took all this pillaging and burning quite seriously. It says in the between here, the houses of Mr. Shreve, Israel Shreve, Colonel of the 2nd New Jersey, and Mr. Tallman, having been burnt that morning. Tallman was a member of the Provincial Congress. Commander-in-Chief gave a reward of 25 guineas. So they took this pillaging quite seriously. Entree on the 23rd, the army marched in 2 columns, the 5th Brigade under Leslie forming the advance of that on the left. Cornwallis commanded the column, proceeded to the Rising Sun, and this is back there. And then the Queen Rangers followed. Now, when they came into Crosswicks, the Queen's Rangers were the first to arrive, and they met with some resistance there. You had Dayton in the 3rd New Jersey, Colonel Dayton. You had militia there, and they fired, and they mortally wounded, or they appeared to be mortally wounding, second in command of Simcoe's Queen's Rangers, Captain Stevenson. He would eventually go back to New England, survive, and come back and fight again. One or two of the enemy were killed by grape shot from the 3-pounder brought on from the height of the Crosswicks Creek whilst the bridge was repairing. Now, the meeting house today, here's the skirmishing with the Queen's Rangers who wore the green jackets. Here's the encampment, Crosswicks, get from Andre's journal, quite detailed, no doubt about the houses, the churches. It's just, man was quite an artist. Here's the meeting house, still exists today. Beautiful, beautiful building. I believe it's around 1770 this was built. And here's the cannonball from the Patriots that was there. Someone took it for a while, kept it in their house, then was returned. It's the same 3-pounder lodged in essentially the north wall of the Crosswicks meeting, back where it belongs today to be viewed. And here's the only map that shows the drawbridge activity and the skirmishing that occurred there on the morning of the 23rd. Leslie would go back and occupy Bordentown on the night of the 24th, or the 23rd. That was in the morning. Evening he'd spend at Bordentown and then join the troops marching to Allentown on the 24th. It said the 16th Dragoons, supported by a battalion of Grenadiers Light Infantry, were pushed to pursuit 2 miles on the Allentown Road. Now, this is after they crossed the bridge that had been destroyed, but whether or not they used their copper plate bridge, pontoons, or whatever, but they seemed to get across without no trouble. When the enemy were at work destroying the bridge. Now, 2 miles from Crosswicks won't put you in Allentown. Allentown's about 4 miles away. So I suspect the Continental and militia troops crossed what's known as not Black Creek, but Back Creek, out another tributary of the Crosswicks watershed. Simcoe pursued at the same time, I assume without their second in command, Stevenson. General Leslie with the 5th Brigade massed the Bordentown Road when the column turned off at the Rising Sun. He afterwards proceeded to Bordentown where he lay on his arms all night. Nipphausen hunted about 2 miles on the right of Crosswicks. That would be at the Wallingford place, where it was said, now they didn't use a pontoon bridge there either, but because there's a first-person account here locally, that they watched the troops fell the trees to create the crossing at the Crosswicks at Wallingford. Here's an image of an updated Joseph Borden house, which was destroyed on May 8th. These same defenses were tested on May 8th when a large contingent was set up to Delaware. Some say in retaliation for the Battle of the Kegs, when these smart patriots here, Francis Hopkinson and Joseph Borden, and others floated some explosive devices down in barrels down the Delaware to attempt to blow up the fleet, caused quite a ruckus, but didn't do much damage. So to test those defenses, they sent a detachment up here on longboats to the Crosswicks Creek. They destroyed quite a bit of shipping that they had sunk in the creek. It was quite a disaster on May 8th. Colonel Kirkbride of Bucks County, his estate was destroyed also, and Borden here representing Burlington County. Quite a shame. But this lovely house still exists today in downtown Bordentown. Now, as they approached Allentown, we know they had to cross this bridge. This is known as the Stone Bridge. well named. And we have some local tradition that there was a British officer shot here, but it seems to conflict with the Captain Stevenson story of his being shot in Crosswicks. Colonel Woodward, in his history of Burlington, seems to think Stevenson was wounded twice, which would have been a really tough day for the guy. But it's hard to discern exactly what happened. But this bridge still exists just outside of Allentown as you approach from Crosswicks. Back to the map. Where is Washington at this time? Where is Waldo? Well, Washington, after spending 2 days in Hopewell, finally gets intelligence that the British are in Allentown, and soon they will have to decide on which route they're taking. The route from Allentown to Cranberry and the Raritan, or to the Amboys, goes through Heightstown. So Washington is concentrating his forces there. After the detachments sent from Hopewell, Morgan's detachment, he sends another detachment of picked men of around 1,400 men under General Scott. And they head off from Hopewell. and moved down towards the Trenton area. Actually, Morgan's riflemen got to Trenton about the same time as the skirmishing at the drawbridge here, but arrived a little bit late. They would go on to Crosswicks. I doubt if they participated in that battle, but eventually they would occupy that area. But now it gets interesting because Morgan's coming up on the 24th. Washington again moves slowly to Kingston to eventually occupy Cranberry by a circuitous route here through Dayton nearly, and encamps at John Wetherell's house here in Cranberry. A detachment, large detachment under Lafayette is occupying Hightstown at that time. Hamilton is sent out as an aide to reconnoiter Allentown. Von Steuben's reconnoitering the British troops here also. They need to get the intelligence on exactly which route the British and Clinton will be taking. Here's the encampment in Allentown. Quite extensive. Here's Doctor's Creek. This map's a little off because this is what's known as Indian Run today. Doctor's Creek, there would have been would have extended further west here. And this little tributary here along the Old York Road, north of Allentown, is known today as Indian Run. You got the Jaegers, you got the 5th Brigade, you got the Brigade, 3rd and 4th Brigade of Guards here. This essentially is the location where the warehouses are planned, very close to the historic district of Allentown. Simcoe's men are out here. This is what's known as the Princetown Road. There was a road to Trenton to the west, and bearing north, you go to Princeton from here. And this is the road to Cranberry, to Hightstown. This road was well defended. They fully expected the troops to march this way. So on the 24th, Andre says, Leslie joined Cornwallis at 6 in the morning. The division marched immediately and came to Allentown 4 miles. The 25th, the troops received orders to be under arms at 4 o'clock and marched by the left as soon as the baggage had got in front. This reversion of the order march took up some time, and it was late before the rear was in motion. The Queen's Rangers during this time massed the Princetown Road, and the Chaucers, who had been posted on the west side of the creek, were drawn to the same side with the army. A body of the enemy soon showed themselves and, passing through the village, advanced a little towards the Jaegers, but were dispersed again by shot or 2 from their 3-pounders. Now, in particular, Morgan himself writes to Dickinson on the morning of the 24th. It's 6:30 o'clock. Colonel Morgan marches in the, this is Dickinson, excuse me, writing to Washington about Morgan. Morgan marches in the afternoon for Allentown, fall in their rear. I shall order about 300 militia who are collected there to join him. Colonel White with 40 light horse have marched for the same purpose. Morgan then himself writes to Washington on the 25th at 5 o'clock in the morning. Sir, I received your orders last evening by the dragoon to gain the enemy's right flank and annoy them as much as possible. I am trying to put your order in execution, but as the Crosswicks Creek runs parallel with road as far as Allentown, and at times runs very near it, can't gain their right till we pass that. So essentially, Morgan needs to get past this waterway. This is a tributary of Crosswicks Creek, Doctor's Creek, and this is a tributary of Doctor's Creek, known as Indian Run.
John, I just want to know that we are at the 1 hour mark.
Okay, I'll wrap up soon.
Thanks.
Okay. So later that day at 11 o'clock in the morning, Morgan says, "Sir, I proceeded from Crosswicks to this place where I fell in with the enemy's rear. We exchanged a few shots, no harm come. They drew up on one side of the creek and we down the other. I sent some parties to skirmish with them, and when they immediately made off, took the right-hand road towards Shrewsbury. I moved my whole party after them about a mile and then filed off to the right and intend to gain the right this evening. I'm afraid that I shan't be able to do them much damage. They encamp in a body so compact that it's impossible to get any advantage. Except that we were able to beat their rear guard, which is pretty strong." So he beat their rear guard here, just outside of Allentown, at a place known as Eglinton, which they would eventually occupy. Here's the mill at Allentown. This is the later version of the mill. The older mill stood a bit behind here. Here's the encampment in Allentown. Beautiful map. This is just incredible. It shows not only the Allentown encampment, but the Nipfausen would move over to Imlaystown here, where the baggage would be protected, and staying south here, following the old Burlington path, and the Old Jerk Road here. It's a very, very historic area because it has these early old roads traversing here. Here's Walford, where Nipfausen had stayed. It said he ate pig's feet there for dinner. And, well, I don't want to get into his personal habits, but that's local tradition stuff. Here's an image I took of another reenactment of British men with green jacketed Queen's Rangers. Andre says, "It said Morgan's riflemen were close at hand. As the rear quitted the ground, a few of the rebels possessed themselves of the house of Robert Montgomery's Eglinton, which had been Lord Cornwallis's headquarters, but were speedily dislodged by a gun of the light infantry. The division halted at Upper Freehold. The Rising Sun. This is the second Rising Sun. This is in Clarksburg, today Millstone Township. And on the 26th, from that location, there was skirmishing there, according to Lord Cornwallis also. They say the road had marched through was very sandy, and the land except in the neighborhood of Allentown deemed very poor. Here's an image of Eglinton, the old estate, which was demolished back in the 1970s. Pattern bomb brickwork here, quite a beautiful site. It still remained the scars of that skirmish. That is located not very far from the location of the warehouse development site. And at the intersection of the Shrewsbury Road here and today Route 524 and the Old York Road 539. And this is a map found, excuse me for the quality of it, but I didn't go back to Rutgers Special Collections where it's located, but it's attributed to General Clinton himself, and it shows the road network. And what's interesting about this is that we know Hamilton is reconnoitering here in Allentown, actually spends the night of the 25th here, and so did Scott's troops of approximately 1,400. And since there were so many, they most likely occupied the same site as the British, sites of the British in Allentown, which would include the development site. But Lafayette and his strong detachment of a couple thousand men with Wayne's regiments or brigades, etc., is still in Hightstown, and they would eventually occupy the same Rising Sun site that the British troops will here in Clarksburg. But I was curious as to whether they took the Shrewsbury Road by way of of Allentown, or if there was another road. But there appears to be, according to this period map, another route from Heightstown to Clarksburg, which they most likely took. The writing on that map says the country is clear and good. The Monmouth Road to Morris's Tavern. Morris's Tavern essentially just between Allentown and Clarksburg. From thence for 9 miles is rather sandy, a good deal of barren woods, but interspersed with plantations. The remainder to Freehold, open and clear, and same all the way to Freehold. No creek or interruptions. Now here's another stone bridge. Looks familiar to the other. Well, actually, this looks a bit older because the last one had brick lining in there. This is on the Charleston Springs Golf Course. Actually, it's not on the golf course itself, but on preserved land. That was part of the area there, just to the west. And this is most likely where the first division marched again, because Nifthausen remains on the path from Clarksburg, continues on Route 524, meets up with today the Monmouth Road, Route 537, and proceeds to Freehold. Not entirely into the city, but encamps today with Smithville, essentially where 537 and 527 intersect. This is the encampment at Rising Sun. Now, there were two places that, interestingly, Washington would have had the most success. One would have been in Whitehorse at the drawbridge there, because there was a large ridge that extended from Whitehorse through Yardville up to Crosswicks, along that whole creek back there. If they attempted to cross there, or Washington attempted to oppose them, he would have been in good condition and probably would have been able to stop the march around Crosswicks. But again, he didn't know which way they were going, and he was a little late getting to this party. The other place would have been over here on Route 524, because opposite this hill, these two hills here, there's another hill and high ground that goes all the way back to Imlaystown, where you can see all the way to Princeton from up there. It's amazing. And here we know that there was Joseph Bloomfield and his detachment were stationed, and they were watching the British troops at the same time the British troops were watching them from hill to hill. It's quite a narrow area. Today, it's the site of the Robbins burial ground, which has an ancestor of Abraham Lincoln buried there. It's been recently reclaimed by the family, the Robbins family, and they've actively, the last few years, been working to restore that site. So it's not part of the Aspic Wildlife Area. They have full possession, and it's a wonderful site, and to see the view in the valley from that location is quite a sight. So I encourage people to go up there. It's really a nice location. So that was the furthest west that this encampment had occupied. This is Agris Road today, or excuse me, Rising Sun Tavern Road, and then Agris goes off here. But essentially, this is the way that Lafayette would have eventually left this area, because there was a lot of communication back and forth with Hamilton and Washington, and they were too far extended, and they could not be supported. And Washington's coming from Cranberry now, who set his army in a quick march, and they were going along Route 524 eventually to Freehold, and needed to consolidate forces in Englishtown. And this road here would have taken them to that location. Here's the Rising Sun Tavern, an image of the Willow Tree, what was also known as the Willow Tree Tavern at that time, no longer exists. And Andre's journal, essentially talking about the weather and them stopping up the wells and making life very difficult for them in their march. And how Nipfausen was able to go through and remain relatively untouched throughout this. And on the 27th, the Army halted at Freehold. And there's the Lutz painting, which is part of the possession of Monmouth County Historical Association, and which gratefully they've decided to keep in their possession. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, John. That was fascinating. You know so much about the local history. Very, very interesting.